Today I am visiting with Singleton here in the Law Library at Florida Coastal School of Law. Nikki was the Associate Dean for Library and Information Service here at the law school. And I understand now, Nikki, you are in the process of retiring through sort of a sabbatical that you're on now for the rest of this academic year, and then you join those of us in the so-called Every Day is Saturday Club. You don't have to get yourself to the office and meet with the usual array of issues that working people do. Even directors who are notorious for farming out all the real work to their subordinates. At least I think our staffs used to maybe think that, some of them. Being retired myself, and now for a little over 10 years, I recommend it. It's a nice lifestyle. You'll like most people going into retirement, there are two questions. One, can I afford it? Well, I leave that to them, although it usually works. But the other is, what am I going to do with my time? And the reality is, you'd be surprised. There are things you've wanted to do, and you rediscover, and you do them. Travel, whatever it is. But let's move back in your life. So, Nikki, could we begin with a little history? Where you were born, what was your life like when you were young, and today?
Well, I'm from South Carolina. I grew up on the coast, as my dermatologist can confirm, across the street from the ocean, and got all 3 degrees at the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
But I came to the University of Florida first, and unlike my children, I couldn't wait to get out of town when I was graduating from high school. So I went to the University of Florida, came back to South Carolina when my father was ill, and finished at the University of South Carolina, and then got the library degree there as well, and eventually the law degree, and fell into this wonderful profession just by happenstance. I mean, I've actually known someone who had this revelation when she was in the 10th grade that she wanted to be not only a librarian, but a law librarian. And I went through library school and never heard of a law librarian, so I've always admired her for that.
How did you actually come to this realization that this might be the way you wanted to, have a career in?
Well, and it's sort of a odd story involving failed romance and sad music. But I was in the English department, and the politics was intense. And a friend of mine who was in the first class at the University of South Carolina College of Librarianship said, why don't you do this? And I hate this cliche, but I always did like books and was sort of a bookish person. And I went to the library school and had a taste of cataloging, and then fled to the Institute of Media Arts at the University of South Carolina. They would take the credits toward my degree in librarianship. I was research assistant for a composer in residence and took courses in filmmaking and sound recording. And the Institute of Media Arts moved to the basement of the then new law school building. I came up through the lobby of the law school one day, and I saw this fellow I'd gone to high school with, who on the evolutionary scale was about a 1/4 inch higher than grits. And I thought, how's he going to law school?
How's he going to survive as a lawyer, huh?
Well, my daddy had gone to law school in the 20s. So I thought, well, if he could do it, I could do it. So I
Why
did
not?
it. Yeah. And at that point, I had a library degree. And fortunately, a live-in love life. My husband and I got married in May, and then I entered law school in the fall.
Right.
But I can remember wandering in to Robin Mills' office
Okay.
at the University of South Carolina,
Uh-huh.
and sitting down and across from her and saying, "What do you do?" And it just sounded so interesting.
Uh-huh.
I loved an academic atmosphere,
Uh-huh.
and I would go to school forever. I mean, just loved learning, loved the whole, feel of it, and the students. I mean, the teaching and the interaction with the students, and quite frankly, I love being around people who are smarter than I am, and a law school's a good place to find people who are a whole lot smarter than I am.
Well, I don't know. You are also an esteemed professor of law here at the law school. And,
Yes.
So that, by definition, you're supposed to be smarter than anybody else. Isn't that how it works? Well, you do know in advance what the questions are on the exam. Now, that gives you a head up.
Yes,
like
because you write the exam.
That's right. Unfortunately, that's how it is. You not only write it, but you grade it.
Well, and someone once said that you learn something when you teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, you do.
Yeah.
And you get questions, and you have to figure out how to answer them, and you do some quick learning. Sometimes I had to, say, well, I'll talk with you later. Well, the idea was I needed to do some figure out what that was all about. Because you don't always know every nuance of everything.
But you know where to find it.
Yeah, but you're expected to by your students. There used to be the old joke, and I imagine it is all over, that, we didn't really get paid to teach. That was much too much fun. But when you graded, you earned your keep. That's where you got paid for grading exams.
Yes.
Because that is tougher, yeah. Well, with that, so you were attracted, you're talking to Robin Mills, and you didn't give her the answer that Rhea Ballard Thrower says she gave to Bill James when he suggested she should be a law librarian. She'd been working in the library. And she said, "What's that?" But
No,
you sort of had it figured out?
I had my degree. I'd never intended to be a law librarian, but then I was her research assistant and took the advanced legal research class with her and just thought it sounded like a pretty good gig. Because our first child was born shortly after exams, my second year in law school, so we knew we wanted to have a family, and I didn't want to work 1,000 hours a week. So it worked out just perfectly.
Allegedly, some of our lawyer colleagues or counterparts do work about $1,000 hours a week.
That's
Yeah, at least there are allegations of that, especially the younger ones who are associates in some of the larger firms. Yeah. Now, the academic life, it was suited for me. So I certainly, when you say that this was sort of what you gravitated to, I can fully understand and appreciate that, I think.
Yeah, and I had a small taste of the corporate environment. Because after I was admitted to the South Carolina bar, my husband and the young daughter and I traveled for about 2 years around this country and in Europe, and ended up in San Francisco. And I was looking for a job, and a woman who was on maternity leave, and so I was working in the library of a corporation. And I thought, no, I'm in academia. Certainly, you've had a stellar career and in the law library field as an academic. But before we talk a little bit about that, can I ask you another question? Sure.
I like to steal good ideas that others have, and I have listened to Frank Hodak, who's also doing some of these conversations for the history. And he has a question, basically, that now I have incorporated usually in my things I like to talk about, and that is, When you're not working, assuming there probably are some occasions like that, do you have any particular special interests, passions, hobbies, that sort of thing that you'd like to talk about?
My husband and I like to travel.
Uh-huh.
In fact, we're getting ready to go on a trip.
Mm-hmm.
We love to visit cities and museums and, just kind of go from place to place. I love to cook, and I feel quite proud that one of the boys one of my sons is a chef.
Ah.
So, who also does stand-up comedy, which I'm not that proud of.
You're
But
not into that as much. Hopefully he's very accomplished at both. Maybe you can develop an appreciation for the comedy.
well, if he'd cleaned it up a bit, maybe.
Well, in this day and age, he wants to make money as a comedian. He's got to be a little bit off color on occasion. I think they all are, aren't they? Well, I don't know. Maybe you and I shouldn't know that. So I better withdraw that question.
But I have projects, things that I want to do,
Mm-hmm.
like go through the shoe boxes of photographs and do that, scan them, and then give them. I've been cleaning out closets,
Mm-hmm.
paring down. So there's a lot of things to do. One of the, I think one of our recently retired colleagues said, "You'd be surprised that you had enough time to go to work."
I've heard that description from others, or retirees.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it really, I recommend what you're about to undertake, or actually you're sort of phasing into now with
And it
this
was,
sabbatical.
this came out of the blue. We have an interim dean, and he met with me early in the semester and said, "I heard that you were thinking about retiring in July." I said, "Well, yes, I'm old enough." And then he, made me this offer
Mm-hmm.
about spending the last time here on sabbatical. And it's great because it gives me time to clean out my office, which of course...
Maybe that was his agenda. He
Yeah.
figured your successor would need an office and right away, and this was one way to ensure it.
Well, and one of the reasons why I was so ready to accept the offer,
Uh-huh.
well, the dean that I came to work for was no longer here.
Mhm.
And what a great team this library has. And Colleen Manning is now the interim director.
Good.
And so I wanted to make sure he would make her that offer. And,
Sounds like you've handled the transition very well. I mean, you have the right people in place. This is probably the ideal time to move on in your life to retirement.
well, and one of the things that they talk about in the corporate environment is succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been planning to go out the door, basically.
That's good. I remember in anticipation of my own retirement, my wife and I would talk about, well, first where we wanted to go, and we settled that, at least the general part of the country. And then, we were going to get a new house, obviously, because we weren't living out there, and we needed someplace to live. And so we began the whole process of deciding, well, where and what, and, what kind of features, and that was actually a lot of fun. And I would go to the internet and pull up the house listings for the areas we were considering, and which would give us ideas on pricing and features and so on, but also houses to look at. And every once in a while, I did this over about 3 years actually, even though I had a target date for retirement, which was tied to the university's benefits package for retirees, for retired faculty, and I wanted that to be maximum, so that gave me the date that I would do this.
There's a wonderful German word that I really can't recall for that Sunday afternoon depression when you got Monday morning is coming very quickly and you have so much to do and it's gone away.
Yeah.
No.
I think some of the depression also hits about Thursday afternoon. You realize you have so much to do and you only have one more day that week to do it.
Yes.
Well, let's sort of move back into your actual working years. As much fun as it is to talk about retirement, I think some of our viewers are probably a little more interested in what you did. And you started out at the Barkle Law Library at the University of Pittsburgh, as I recall.
Well, my first job as a reference librarian was at Nova.
Oh, at Nova, down
In Fort
South
Lauderdale.
Florida, yeah.
I was there for 3 years and then moved to Pittsburgh.
Did you know a Clell Davis by any chance? Was she there at that time? She was at Nova for a while. She was was very interested in audio video things in those days, motion pictures and teaching. And I worked with her on a committee probably about 50 years ago, so maybe I'm dating us too much.
I think Nova started in the mid-'70s,
Yeah.
and I went there in '81.
Yeah, no, maybe I've got the school wrong then, if it started that late, because this was before the mid-'70s. It's got to be the late '60s, early '70s, and I thought she had said she was at Nova, but maybe I'm wrong, and there are some other schools down there. But Chloe was a wonderful woman and good colleague, and on committees with me in audio-visual committees at ALL back in the old days when they had that committee. And I got to know her. She was a lot of fun. But you started then at Nova as a reference librarian, and then you want to pick it up from there and tell us a bit about your career and how it progressed.
Well, I just I had twin boys in South Florida, and again, this is why I sort of lucked into this. It sounded like a horrible situation upon reflection after the fact, but I worked for Carol Roenbach. I was in the building. We were connected by a breezeway with the office building where her office was, and the classrooms and the faculty. But this was basically an old auditorium. And the person who had been the head of public services was gone, and the person who had been the reference librarian was gone. So it was just me and the circulation desk attendant. So I basically had to teach myself the legislative history process, and just found it fascinating, and thought, this is it, this is it. And then met Jenny Parrish at AALL in San Diego, and then applied for that position as associate director at the University of Pittsburgh. Hauled my little family up to the frozen north.
Yeah, especially if it had been this winter that we're just in. Yep, they really had a whopping winter in terms of snow and ice and cold temperatures up there.
Brought it all back.
Yeah, it's a little nippy down here in the morning this morning for me.
One of my elderly aunties was so horrified, or I don't know, would be surprised that I would go up north to work. That the first winter.
Aren't those all Yankees up there?
Well, they are. And she sent me a check for $50 because she knew the heating bill was going to be outrageous.
You just didn't know how outrageous.
Well, we moved up, and I had rented this little house. We'd gone up, and then my husband came, moved the family up. And he's from New York, so he took one look at this cobblestone street that completely up the side of a hill, and he said, "This is going to be horrible in the wintertime." It never dawned on me. It was.
You'd grown up in Florida on the beach.
Yeah.
Snow, ice, what's that?
Yes. But I was there in Pittsburgh for 10 years, and we had a wonderful, cohesive team there. It was just one of those things where, sometimes things coalesce, and you're working with really good people who are all focusing on the same thing. Got a lot of experience there, and Jenny left to go to Hastings and was the acting director and then went to Oklahoma,
Yeah, that's
where
right.
Mort Schwartz.
Mort Schwartz was the librarian, yes.
And,
Yeah, he's somebody that I've known for many years too. And a few months ago, I was able to go down to Davis, California, where he still lives,
Oh,
and talk to him
nice.
for our project.
oh,
And at the time, he has a little dog, a very nice little dog, but he's a dog. And Mort had given him a bone, thinking that I think his name was Tony, the dog, would go off and hide someplace and work on that bone for a while, and we could have our discussion without any interruptions. Well, Tony was fascinated by the whatever we were doing, so he's right there on the floor, just below the camera angle, chewing like crazy on this bone, and you can hear it. So we had to introduce the dog so that the viewers would understand what that noise was. Working with Mort must have been quite a treat. I mean, he has always seemed to be a very, very decent, first-class kind of guy, as well as a good librarian.
Now, he was there much before
Oh,
I got there.
had he moved on? Was Lolly
had-
Gass away there yet?
He had
or-
moved on, then Lolly had moved on. There was
Scott Pagel, I
Scott
think, was there
Pagel
for a while.
was my immediate predecessor,
Okay.
and so. But Jenny Parrish had been Lolly's associate director
Uh-huh.
at Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
And, this is one of the things that just amazed me about the community of law librarians.
Mhm.
So small that you could almost trace people's career, like,
Mhm.
oh, this person was here, and then they were there, like Southern genealogy. I mean,
Mhm.
it's complex,
Mhm.
but there are all of these interconnecting lines of people who've worked with people.
Uh-huh. So you were at Oklahoma for a while. Is there anything particular that you remember accomplishing there, or anything of that sort?
Well, we moved. We were going to add on a courtroom and library
Mm-hmm.
to the building. They were going to do renovation and addition while they had school in session. The library moved out.
Mm-hmm.
We moved about 5 miles down the road in a former movie theater that had been converted into a party venue. So the floors did not slope like they usually do in a movie theater. And two-thirds,
The pencils would roll off the
the book stacks would be a little leaning.
Yes.
We put 2/3 of the collection in deep storage we didn't have access to, and then had about 1/3 of the collection in this venue.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick Ducey was at Tulsa then,
All
and
right.
he had about not the same situation, but was very helpful in deciding which things should go into storage and which things we could make available. And so it was quite an interesting experience.
Mm-hmm.
They had snow one year, and of course my sons and I had to go over and drape the snow got so heavy on the roof that it was dripping.
Oh,
Yes, when it thawed. So we were.
I'd be more concerned if it didn't just drip, that it all fell through, which it sometimes can do. If it's
Right.
heavy enough, and the building
Yes.
isn't structured for it.
Now we went and got sheets of plastic and put
Oh.
over the. But it is an absolutely beautiful building, and Darren Fox is the director there now,
Mm-hmm.
doing a great job. If you ever have an opportunity to see it, it's just
Well,
beautiful.
actually, I like to travel. I mean, if anybody who's watched very many of these has heard me talk about how wonderful my experience is getting to come and reconnect with colleagues who are old friends like you and others that I've done, and meet some new ones.
Well, it's Busman's holiday, when anytime we go to a different city, we'd always go to the law library.
Of course.
One spring break, I drug, my three sons and a husband down to Austin and went in to see Roy. And
Roy Murphy and the University of Texas.
He took us all around.
Now that library was very different in
It
one
was.
characteristic. I mean, he had all that artwork in there that the donors behind the
Yes.
naming gifts had given them. And,
Just
it
beautiful.
was really something to see.
And then we included the Texas Ranger Museum on the trip too, so the little boys saw
The
all the
guys
guns.
were
so
okay
they were
with that.
happy.
Well, Roy Mirsky loved to show off that library. He'd worked very hard getting it and putting it together, and then the donors came in and put all this other stuff in there that added a whole different kind of ambience than I think any of the rest of us had.
Well,
Although-
they had a curator.
Oh, yes. Well, they had to,
Mhm.
because they had so much, artwork of various sorts, and it was really very tasteful, I thought. But Roy was working on me. He knew I hadn't been down there. I used to go when I worked in Houston. My boss, Al Coco, and I would go up to Austin and meet with him at the university. That was always fun. Had lunch, and that sort of thing. But I hadn't really done this in the years that he had the new building. And so I was down. I was on the executive board of AELL at the time, and I did a site visit to a chapter in Dallas and made a side trip to Austin. And Roy was, he'd been after me for years, as I think he was after everybody. Come on down and see the place, visit. And I did, and it was nice.
It's
Yeah.
just beautiful.
Mhm.
Lovely campus.
Now, you were at Oklahoma, and then did you come from Oklahoma here to Florida Coastal? Or?
Yes.
Because that was back in about 2005, I believe.
Right. The dean who hired me at Oklahoma,
Mhm.
Peter Gopplerud, came here to be the dean
Mm-hmm.
in 2004. And I was interested in coming here because I had worked with him before, but I'd followed the kind of the startup and the evolution of Florida Coastal because I really liked their philosophy. I liked the newness of it all.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you can do when you're, I guess, at a private school or even in our situation, in a corporately owned school is, you can be flexible. You can do things quicker than you can
You don't have
in a state.
the powers that be that you have to get approval from.
Well, right there, but it doesn't have to go through so many layers.
Yeah.
And
I can appreciate when you say that, working here at Florida Coastal, which is, in a sense, a streamlined kind of place, because it's not that big and not that bureaucratic, I assume, and it is a pleasure in that sense.
and when I hesitated because for-profit law school, what in the world does that mean? And Peter Gopplerud, was the dean, said, the emphasis is on law school because I know you've been in several institutions. What institution doesn't look at the bottom line?
Yeah.
A lot of times for the university, the law school
Yeah.
is the moneymaker. And so it was fully accredited and bursting at the seams. The old buildings were on Beach Boulevard, several miles from here.
Okay.
And so they were looking around at various locations. The city wanted us to move downtown.
Uh-huh.
And then, but, there was always the parking and the security issues. And then we found this location. And I was hired in I guess, October of 2004. But they were doing the planning for this building.
Okay.
It was had been a call center.
Mhm.
And so you had 220,000 square feet that hadn't been divided up into offices, basically.
Mhm.
I can remember walking in this building thinking, Peter Goplerwood is out of his mind.
Well, you didn't have to tear all the walls out to
Yeah.
turn it into a law school.
This is, but it worked out very well.
It's a nice campus. I mean, coming today, and of course, part of it is the weather is so fantastic here at the moment, as it often is, I guess. It's a nice approach. It's a clean, well laid out city as I approached it. I'm very impressed with this part of the country, frankly.
And so I would come back and forth to
Uh-huh.
the planning committee meetings, and the Infolaw group hired design consultants
Mhm.
who came to the old campus, talked to the students, observed the interaction
Mhm.
of students and faculty, and the kind of learning that takes place outside of the classroom. You know,
Mhm.
when nobody wants to leave and everybody's asking questions, and it's a very exciting time. And so they created little spaces in this building for
Mhm.
that have whiteboards, that have computers, that can screens and projectors that you
Mhm.
can use, but they're outside of the classroom.
Mhm.
So they really had, took a lot of good ideas from different kinds of consultants, not your usual building consultant,
Usual,
like
right.
at Oklahoma. I mean, it was very traditional.
Mhm.
Was built in 2000. That's almost last century, but it was during that time when law schools were, I called it forward to the past,
Mm.
when they wanted that sort of Gothic academic feel.
Sort of a retro look, like it from the 1930s almost.
Well,
You
it's
see
the-
on some of the older campuses, or
Yeah, have you been to St. Louis, to
yes, yeah, I've seen
Washington?
that. I've seen that.
WashU.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that really looks like it was part of an older campus.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the building before, which looked like the cinder block concrete slab.
Well, that was a pure '60s type.
Yeah.
I don't know. I should use the term on camera, but it was not my ideal. It was very reminiscent of the building we built in Houston for the law school. It was, that was the era when the architects were figuring, well, we'll let the people, and in the law libraries, the books, give it the color and characteristics. Of course, all the law books look the same, the West Reporter size. But they didn't seem to think about that, and we couldn't convince them. But the school, Florida Coastal, is relatively new. I think the first graduating class was only 1999, which, by
Right,
some
it was-
standards is pretty recent. So
Started in 1996.
yeah, that'd be about right. You came in 2005, so the school was developed as a school, but you were getting ready to come here to this facility, I guess.
Right, we moved into this building in 2006.
Well, you've already mentioned one of the characteristics of working here as opposed to perhaps a place like a state university, I would guess, that has a larger bureaucracy that has to be worked with, or with whom you work. Could you talk a little bit about what it's been like? Because you have had, the library was being built presumably after you came here as well as before. I mean, you don't do these all in 24 hours. And yet the technology, the way we go about providing access to information was changing tremendously from mostly paper-based books to a mix, but a good heavy mix on the side of digital. You must have been involved with making trade-offs and decisions. Can you talk a little bit about some of that experience? not many people I've talked to have had such experience. So I want to pick your brains and find out for us and our viewers what that might have been like.
Well, when they started the library, they were volume count
Yes.
was an essential part of it, and there was a notion that volume count was important for accreditation.
A very
And
important
so-
notion because that it was for so
Right.
long.
So they went and bought things wholesale, and as you do, look to older collections who are moving on or getting rid of things, and so they built a collection. But when I got here and knew that the collection building was not the focus. We're not a research library.
Understandably.
Yeah, and
Sure.
so, we didn't plan for that. But it's very interesting, the transition to electronic versions and the digital versions of the information, because it's the same information, but it's just a different format. And so I had the opportunity to build a library team with a focus on teaching, because I think, in the old days when we taught legal research and with the books,
Yeah.
and why did students have to learn how to do legal research? The books were there. They knew how to read, and now everyone says, well, everything's on the computer. You don't need to teach them how. It's the same information, but you have to teach the information literacy, and you have to teach the skills of finding things, evaluating things. So that part
always
has
had
changed.
to do that. Yes. Yeah.
So it's that's where the emphasis is.
Well, the amount of information, even in our more traditional libraries of years back, was so tremendous that you did have to teach people how to evaluate and focus their research, or they'd be in the library the whole time, and clients would fire them as attorneys. I mean, they wouldn't be getting anything out of them except all this time billing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now it's even more important because they're not billing time, they're moving toward transactional based billing.
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
extra time means less money for the attorney.
Sure. It's a different profit system, but it probably in a lot of ways is a lot better for the customer.
Well, and it's interesting to see how available information is for free. I mean, not just the proprietary databases that are so jealously guard their information,
Oh, don't do that.
but and that's where the instruction is so much more important, because they have to be able to recognize and evaluate the legal information that's just out there.
Well, certain things I was going to say don't change, but they do change, and yet in some ways they're the same. And I guess what you've just described is in the old days with books and the new days with books, but mostly digital for a lot of things. A lot of it is still the same. How you have to know how to access the stuff efficiently.
Well, and people say these students now, they were born with computers in their mouths, and they can amuse themselves.
I've heard it described that today's law students, and probably a lot of lawyers even, can sit there at their cubicle or wherever they're working, and all these books lined up behind them, that they could actually be using, but they want something on their screen, and they'll look high and low find it on the screen, ignore all the other stuff right behind them.
It's interesting how the electronic culture is changing the workplace, because the younger people who do use and rely so heavily on digital information resent having to come to work, and be in a physical location for a certain number of hours.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to see what's going to change.
Yeah. I'm a prime example of somebody who does rely on the digital world. I've been retired for, as I mentioned, 10 years or more, but I'm not retired and next door to the law school and come in every day to an office that they give retired faculty like some people have done. I moved 3,000 miles away from the place for all the right reasons, and I think. And so I have, my law library is basically my computer in my den. And for the most part, that has served me very well. I can find just about anything I need for my work on that. Although I recently had to go to 2 law libraries to find real book copies because I couldn't get them on the computer. And this was actually, I had volunteered to be on a committee for ALL, and we were evaluating some publications. So I had to go find the things. I mean, if I'm evaluating, I better have looked at them pretty extensively. And I tried the local, I live in Olympia, Washington, I tried the state law library, the Supreme Court library, and they had some of the stuff, but they didn't have all of it. So I had to drive up to Seattle one day, which was actually a lot of fun anyhow, and go to the University of Washington and found the remaining of the things. But, after 10 years, I hadn't used the law library in that sense since I'd retired until just recently. I hadn't any need to. And it wasn't that just because I wasn't doing anything, because I have been reading and doing things and working on projects and accessing the materials. But for the most part, I can understand, if you know what you're doing, and hopefully I at least do enough, but who knows, you can find a lot of stuff on the computer today. So it's an interesting world you have evolved into for us here at Florida Coastal and in law schools and law libraries in general. Changing world.
Yes, it is. It is.
It's got to be exciting in a lot of ways, though.
Well, it's several years ago. I went to, 10, to visit an elderly auntie, and she was 99 years old. And I said, "Oh, you've seen so many changes from the first airplane to the man on the moon," and she looked at me and she had a twinkle in her eye. And she said, if nothing ever changed, we'd all be so bored.
She's right. I think.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. She's still as sharp as the tack, it sounds like.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one more story, and it's about a colleague of ours, Viola Bird, who for many years was Marion Gallagher's assistant at the University of Washington in Seattle. Well, Viola, like people who are successful at living, got older, and she moved in when she was almost 90 to a retirement community where you could have more or less service as you needed it. And then one day her daughter would come around and give her, take her to the stores and so on, because Viola, I guess, was no longer driving. And she announced one day to her daughter that I want to buy a computer. Now, Viola had never had a computer, and she came up in the days when you had a typewriter, if you had anything like that. So she was going to go out and get this computer, and did. Viola had announced she was going to, nobody was going to tell her differently. And so out they went, and then she brought this thing, and she set herself up with it and learned how to use it. And of course, she was doing email and all the other stuff that we became familiar with and started to use in the 90s and first part of this century. And one day, my wife and I were having lunch with Viola, nearby place. We did this a few times after we moved out to the greater Seattle area, Olympia, and she lived near there. And she said that it was sort of interesting in the old folks' home, or however she phrased it, and I think that was the term she used. there was a younger gentleman who was about 90. Viola at that point was just tipping 100, and he was beside himself because he had a computer and he had to go to this much older person to tell him how to use it. And he was beside himself, and she thought it was the funniest thing she could talk about that day. But that was Viola, and she was a character.
And you see that in our profession in general, that it not only interesting people, but interested people, and the capacity for learning and for chasing down something that's new. That's why I don't anticipate being bored at all.
You won't be. I can only speak from my experience, but I suspect, Nikki, you will have a lot of very interesting times coming up because it's what you want to do, and you set your own priorities in a whole new type of way.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, sort of, on that note, we're kind of nearing the end of our conversation. It's customary to ask if there's anything that we have not talked about that you would like to mention at this point.
Well, you had asked me about the difference in working for a for-profit institution. And one of the things that was so completely different for me personally was the business principles and business kind of side of it. The whole emphasis on process. And we have, each law school had a process person to help us manage the larger strategic plan and the individual plans for the year's work, both the faculty, the departments, and the emphasis on measuring outcomes. And that was a completely different world.
This sounds very corporate, and the way that the real world works is, some of us refer to the other side, the non-academic.
And it I think in this law school, the blend of academic, which we surely are, and the best principles of corporate culture has been very interesting.
Well, it's an interesting model, and it's been successful. I mean, now the corporation, or whatever it's called, has what, four schools?
They started, they bought Florida Coastal. We
Yeah.
started the one in Phoenix, Arizona, which is Arizona Summit, and Charlotte. And I'm not really sure if it's actually, the ink is dry yet, but the plans are to acquire others.
Yeah. Well, I understand that this is happening, and of course times are changing in higher ed and legal education in particular. Perhaps some aspects of this model and the efficiencies that I assume are come from it is probably very beneficial in its own way.
It's very interesting to think that in the next 10 to 20 years you'll have at college age and professional school age people who don't really have an allegiance to place for education. A lot of our recent immigrants don't have 14 generations going to the University of South Carolina.
Sure.
So you have the opportunity for people to be a little more wide-ranging in their educational possibilities. Now we have, the online schools, and then as legal education moves toward that. I just think it's going to be fascinating to see.
Well, I assume then you are sort of bullish, as they say in investment circles, on the future for law schools and law libraries. Is that a fair statement?
Maybe not in the shape they're in today, but
Well, I think that's a given.
Yeah,
Things are
yeah.
changing. Yeah.
people will always have need of legal advice. You can't buy a refrigerator these days and sign a
You need a
document.
degree in electrical engineering to know how to turn the thing on.
But to know what you're buying and what you're signing, and so I think we'll always need legal advice. So I think it's going to be
Even with
really
these online things that you write your own will and so on, it gets beyond that, you might need some help. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's been delightful visiting here today in Jacksonville and talking with you, Nikki. And as you begin your next phase in life, and I'm delighted you stayed along at least one more day so we could do this, because I know that you and your husband are off on a little trip tomorrow.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. And I want to thank you not only on my behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodek, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor, they're our colleagues, with whom I have the honor of working to develop and put together this oral history of law librarianship, which is going to be part of Spinelli's Law Library reference shelf of Hein Online. And I thank you again for being part of it today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and visiting.
It's my pleasure. As everybody who's seen very many of these knows, I thoroughly enjoy what I get to do now.